When Pan-Africanism is obsolete, Pan-Ecowanism becomes inevitable. Unlike Pan-Africanism, which is simply Afrocentric, Pan-Ecowanism addresses real life challenges of the citizens of West Africa that is becoming increasingly competitive in the new world order as nations of the world struggle over global resources to improve the welfare of their nationals. The sense of making every West African's sense of stakeholders' sentiment of the Ecowas high is a matter of agency at this period in our history, mean the history of West Africa. By sense of stakeholders' sentiment, we mean the sense of ownership as a form of psychological claim, interest or belief a person or group members hold in relation to institutions associated with their group. The mandate all politicians seek for from the people is to be able allow them to assume the responsibility of occupying and managing institutions the people associate themselves with. So, the politicians seek for the mandate of being responsible for addressing institutional concerns of the people. The level of the sense of stakeholders' sentiment is critical to the politicians in the mobilization of the people for their mandate. Politicians are very active in locations where the population's sense of stakeholder sentiment to their institutions are higher and less active where the sense of stakeholder sentiments of the population is very low to their respective institutions. The higher the level of the state's sense of stakeholder sentiment of a population to in an institution, the more politicians appeal for the mandate to assume the responsibility of the institution relating to addressing the people's concern. On the contrary, the lower the level of the sense of stakeholders' sentiment of the population in an institution, the lesser the politicians appeal for the mandate of assuming responsibility relating to the addressing the people's institutionalized concerns. Let us consider some few nations, their nationals, and the umbrella groups institutions the nationals are formally associated with. We shall be considering the Ecowas, in this case Ghana as an example, the European Union, France as an example, and the United States of America, in this case the state of Florida, in relation to their respective stakeholders' sentiments to drive home our points. The sense of stakeholder sentiment of the West African, in other words, Ecowas citizens, for example, the Ghanaian national, is 80% to the government of Ghana, 12% to Pan-Africanism, then to the African Union, 3% to the British Commonwealth, 3% to the United Nations, and 2% to Ecowas. Now, the sense of stakeholder sentiment of the European Union citizens, for example, the French national is 65% to the state of France, 5% to the French Commonwealth, which is the Francophonie, 3% to the United Nations, 2% to NATO, and of course 25% to European Union. Now, let us now look at the United States of America, in this case, Florida, and the nationals of Florida. The sense of stakeholder sentiments of the United States citizens, and here we are taking an example of the state of Florida, in other words, the national of Florida. 65% to the state of Florida, that is what they have. 3% to the United Nations, 2% to NATO, and 30% to the federal government of the United States of America. The current 80% sense of stakeholders sentiment at each nation's national level across the African continent is exactly what the colonialist project is about. In today's time, there are 54 national economies on the African continent, each with the nationals having the 80% sense of stakeholder sentiment to their respective economies and therefore nations and countries. Decolonizations address and ensured all the factors responsible, either by default or intentionally, for sustaining that 80% that were in place at the colony's points of assumptions of nationhood and at independence. These structures are still actively in place even long after independence. The higher state of stakeholder sentiment of the current colonizers' economy is what sustained the new colonization. We all talk about new colonization on daily basis. We seems not to be able to identify what is responsible for why the Ghanaian or the Nigerian or the Ivorian or the Togolese want to be more interested, totally interested, even when nothing is working for this individual in what used to be the colony, and totally oblivious, totally blind, totally insensitive to what is happening at the level of the Ecowas. What we fail to realize is that human beings are very sensitive to their economic need, and therefore the source of that economic need, in time of desperation, human beings focus their mind on that. So the institution that human beings tend to see as what is responsible for their sustaining their life, they hold on to it and then they put in their own loyalty. And this exactly is what the colonies are doing. So you have people in a very, look at Mali, look at Niger, you see people, no education, no food, children, parents, totally hopeless. And yet, the only thing they think about is Mali. That's all. We saw them in Niger. They had a serious problem, and the only way they believe they can address this issue with France is Niger. That is the sense of the stakeholders' sentiments. That exactly is what is sustaining this neo-colonialist mentality. And what chance has an individual of Niger or Ghana when you come to Britain, or you are talking about China, or you are talking about United States of America, or you are talking about even France? There is no chance. What the colonizers created across the African continent are what we call national economies. You can call them countries. Sadly, none of the colonizers' national economy is a viable one. No one single one on the African continent is a viable one. So the only way to overcome the challenges associated with these colonizers' national economies is to recreate new sense of national economies on either regional or continental scale as possible to neutralize the established ones. The challenge has always been, how do we do this? We need to find a way of kind of taking away, redefining the economies, because at this point in time in Ghana we call it the Gogisberian economy, or we remember Gordon Gogisberg. Lord Gog is the one who created what we know today, and we allude that Gold Coast economy to him, and that is all we have, and it's really not working. Now, the 2% of the West African sense of stakeholders' sentiment to the Ecowas is horribly bad. And this explains the lack of interest of the West African politicians to the sensitivity of the West African population on matters relating to the Ecowas of a regional scale. Politicians are not interested. The only practical solution here is to increase the sense of stakeholder sentiment of the West African, that is the ECOWAS, from 2% to 23%. By decreasing the West African, in other words, the Ghanaian, from his 80% to 65%, which is what the EU, the French has got, the American has got. Yes, how do we decrease this thing? From 80%, because the Ghanaian is stuck, is trapped. He can't see anything. The Nigerian cannot see. The Sierra Leonean cannot see. They are trapped. They can't see. They are in it because that is what appeals to them every day. 65% we want to reduce it. And then we will reduce, also decrease the African Union, which is the Pan-Africanist agenda, from 12% to 6%. Thus, adding the 15% and the 6% we got from the 15% from the 65 and 6% from the 12 to the 2% of the ECOWAS that has already got, we are talking about 23%. Now, the 23% of the ECOWAS will make it more viable in meeting the dreams and aspirations of the West Africans at both West African regional level and at international level. Yes. Again, real life issues like food, clothing, housing, healthcare, education will be best dealt with by the ECOWAS than the Afrocentrist Pan-Africanist noise. Black or white, our basic need is a must. We don't have a choice in West Africa. If the ECOWAS project was doing at all, then it must worth doing well. So, invoking the sense of the ECOWAS stakeholder sentiment from 2% to 23% in the West African is a worthy cause. Every decent West African must stand up for this noble effort. Let's all stand up for the ECOWAS of the people. Friends, I have no doubt that you've come a long way with me to see the importance of what we refer to as the sense of stakeholder sentiment in an individual. You will see a Ghanaian sleeping on the street, and when you ask him who is who in Ghana, he will tell you. This is someone who has never even been to a classroom. He will tell you everything you want to know about Ghana. Ask him about the ECOWAS. He'll be looking at you like a donkey. He has to. No clue. He's expecting nothing from the Ecowas. Yet, this Ecowas already has given the people a passport. There are common ID card already. We've been told we can travel across West Africa, capital, individual. We can freely move about. Yet, we are not able to do that. Now we are all crying for a common currency. Yet, the individual sense of sentiment, when you want to whip it, that sentiment, activate it at the Ecowas, it becomes a problem. And the media are very, very important, because the media is an institution that directs the attention of the politician to where the politician must be active. The challenge is, if the ordinary individual has just 2% sense of sentiment, stakeholder in the Ecowas, the media also, like the politicians, they are not interested. So it's now become, how do we solve this problem? Because when the sense of the individual sense of sentiment is 23%, we must achieve that. Then the individual will start making demand on the Ecowas, like the European Union citizens are making demand on the European Union, and the American citizen from Florida is making demand on the federal government of the United States of America. We must find a solution. This is just the case of the chicken and the egg. Which one comes first? Remember, we've been talking about the election of the members of Ecowas Parliament, and this is something with another subject we are going to take on after this very one, so that you can be able to connect these two videos and see what the Europeans did, whether they did it intentional or it's just an accident. It works for them, and it's still there, and it's still active, and it's still working. And every time we make as if we are going away from it, they insist we go back to it. Let us look at how this game is played, and let's see what can be adjusted, and how we are going to do it, and why we must do it. Yes, once again, Kofi Ali Abdul Yekin. As usual, when I come your way, I remind you of the book. Yes, it's trending, it's selling, it's doing very well. And you can see, or if you look at our background, you will feel we need a better outlet to reach out to you. It all comes with some cost. And you know, the engineers who are working for us, they need to be encouraged. So please and please visit our website on www.ecdra.org, ECDRA.org. That is Ecowas Citizens Democratic Right Advocate.org. And get your copy. It's just £9.99p. I've always promised you have your copy on Amazon as well. And quickly, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. But above all, your humble servant, Kofi Ali Abdul Yekin. We'll see you again in the next video. Thank you.